Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this program. So what I wanted to do as a just kind of setting us up today before I ask our other panelists to introduce themselves is to give you a bit of background on why we are doing this program. And little did we know that it would become even more timely since the onset of the COVID-19 virus. Specifically, we wanted everyone to focus and understand that when we are assisting and supporting trafficking survivors or people who are vulnerable to being trafficked, we're really looking at underserved populations in the main. And just by definition, anyone who is trafficked has probably been identified as having some vulnerability, and clearly not receiving services and support in our community is the definition of that. We're certainly seeing now that it is in stark relief that the people who are dying more, the people who are affected more by this virus are people who are in underserved communities. We're seeing rates of 3 and 4 times increased deaths in communities of color, particularly in the Black community. And this is something that we're seeing in such stark relief that we can't ignore the societal conditions that exist that make people so vulnerable, not just to COVID, but to other things like human trafficking. So we're working today together to help shine a light on some of these societal needs and inequities, and showing really how we can value everyone in our culture. We also want to highlight that human trafficking does not happen in a vacuum. It happens on a continuum, and it happens in the context of a culture such as ours, and really our global culture, where people are preyed on because of their vulnerabilities. So you'll see that today we're going to have some really excellent presenters bringing these points home to you. And please know that we're here together for only 90 minutes. And I can tell you this is a topic that we could spend a day on it or more, delving into these issues. Our program today is going to be a combination of a lot of different things. Our presenters are going to give you basic information about human trafficking. And I say basic, I think it's also intermediate and advanced at a lot of levels. We're going to also move through 3 different case scenarios to help illustrate some of the slides. So with that, I will stop and ask Marina Anderson to please introduce herself, and to let me say thank you to you, Marina, for your ongoing talent and your participation here. If you want, and I didn't even tell you, I'm the executive director of STAC, the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. Sorry, I'm an attorney by trade and have been doing this work now for probably about 15 years, 14 maybe. Anyway, Marina, all yours.
Okay, very good, thanks. Marina Anderson, I'm with the Department of Children and Families. I'm the Human Trafficking Coordinator for Northeast and Northwest Florida. Have experience working, vast experience working with sexual related crimes, and then back in 2009 began the task of working human trafficking cases, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, which we're going to discuss here today. So I hope everyone can enjoy this presentation and have a lot of takeaways from it. And again, if you guys have questions, there'll be a Q&A at the end, as well as our emails will be provided. So if you would like to email us directly, feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. And LaShawn, would you like to introduce yourself? And welcome so much to our program today.
Certainly. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm LaShawn Gordon. I'm the Director of Membership and Engagement at United Partners for Human Services. I'm here in Tallahassee, Florida. I've been working with underserved populations about the last 18 years. It's a very mission-driven for me. So excited about joining you all today.
Thanks, LaShawn. And Graciela, my colleague with STAC, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Graciela Marquina. I am the Victim Assistance Director and Coordinator. I have been working with victims and survivors of human trafficking for over a decade already. Thank you, Robin.
Okay, thanks, Graciela, and everybody. All right, we're going to proceed through our presentation now, and I'd like to turn it over to LaShawn to kick us off.
All righty, so we're going to get started just kind of defining for you all who is underserved. And when you hear under, it typically means below. And so the groups that I'm going to go through, these are the people that are really not being served. So they're kind of below the norm of how we should be serving people. And the first group we're going to start with is African Americans. And there's been a lot of biases, a lot of discrimination. African Americans have been a very vulnerable population for a really, really long time. And that still holds true today. There's also a lot of unprotection for African Americans. Moving on down to American Indians, because of cultural and relational, the relational ways they often live their lives. This is another group that's often underserved, forgotten about time and time again. Then we move down to Latinx. And that's another group who is underserved. Again, this is a very close-knit culture that a lot of us don't necessarily always interact with unless they're more socialized. Immigrants and refugees, if we just kind of are aware of what's going on in our world, in our country right now, definitely an underserved population. Those that are limited English proficient, these are the individuals that don't necessarily speak as well as some of us may speak. And so because of those different barriers, they don't all the time get the service that they need. And even in our communities and doing human service work and working in schools, there's just not enough service and support there. Medically underserved. The health crisis is huge right now, very, very huge. And so that continues to be one of the top underserved populations, those with medical needs. Homelessness, again, in any community that you're in, you're going to typically find a large number of homeless population. Because anytime you have homeless people, it's something that we need to address and we need to continue to be working with. And quite frankly, there's just not enough funding out there to really support and serve the homeless population. Individuals with disabilities, there's oftentimes not enough advocates for people with disabilities. There's not enough supports in place. So they often go looked over, they're often forgotten, and of course, they're underserved. Moving to the TQI plus community, this is a community that a lot of times is often taboo. People say, oh, well, I don't know if that's really real. And so people forget that we have to serve this community as well. And so a lot of times, this group is often left out to fend for themselves. And that starts at a very, very young age, very, very young age. Medicaid eligible, Medicaid enrolled. We hear stories all the time about people who are on Medicaid, and right in the middle of their Medicaid, they get a letter saying, you're moving from an HMO to a PPO, or you're going to have to do something different. So they're being underserved because they don't necessarily get a chance to make the choice for themselves. And then also, not every doctor, not every dentist, not every entity takes Medicaid or Medicare. So that can also be a barrier. Low wealth low wages, insecure. Poverty is alive and well, and poverty is a huge risk factor. And so those living in poverty is often forgotten. And that can really, really, really be an underserved population. Those that are in rural areas, living in the city, sometimes we forget that there are a lot of rural areas that are surrounding us. And so we forget about them. Male human trafficking victims, a lot of times the face of human trafficking is often females. And so the males tend to go underserved. Aging adults, we forget about our seniors, often forget about our seniors. And then also there are several other vulnerable populations. The list just kind of goes on and on and on, but those were some of the main ones that we wanted to present to you.
And one thing we've noticed on this too, LaShawn, right, is that there's a pretty big overlap between who's at risk of being trafficked and the list you went through.
Yes, absolutely. So who's at risk of being trafficked? We're looking at these groups that are very, very vulnerable. Immigrants, documented and undocumented. Individuals come here and they kind of a lot of times end up in situations that they don't want to be in, situations that are not okay, because they are immigrants. And so people prey on that. Definitely substance abuse users. A lot of times people get tricked into trafficking because they're under the influence, or somebody says, hey, come with me, I'll give you some of this, not knowing that they're going to be pulled into this situation. Persons with disability, of course, there are physical disabilities, but there's also mental disabilities. And so that is huge as well. Foster care youth, a lot of foster care youth are actually on the streets. They're runaways, and so a lot of times they are already a vulnerable population. So definitely at risk of being trafficked. Unsupervised minors with internet access. There are so many games and tricks going on the internet right now, and so that is one way that kids are being targeted. People disguising themselves on the internet, all type of games, all type of social media. We kind of talked about runaways, but runaway are homeless youth. Sometimes kids are walking around, hey, do you need something to eat? Do you need a place to stay? Mentally ill, you know, when people are mentally ill, there are mental health issues, and then there are also mental delays wrapped up in that. And so they're definitely at risk. Homelessness, unstable housing. Hey, we can provide a place for you to stay a couple weeks. Come on and go with me. There again, there's the LGBTQI plus community. And a lot of individuals in that community, especially those that are transgendered, find themselves in this situation because their families have kind of turned their back on them. There's not a safe place in the community, and so they're definitely at risk. Abuse survivors, those that are victims of sexual violence, domestic violence, even mental and physical abuse, are also at risk for being targeted. Again, low wealth, economic insecure, poverty. Those that are in poverty are definitely at risk. Gang affiliated, sometimes individuals have to sell themselves to be initiated into the gang or be with a certain number of people, not knowing that this is an introduction to trafficking. And then again, any underserved or minority population, they are all vulnerable individuals that can be at risk for being trafficked at any time.
Marina, would you like to add anything to this?
I'll just add very quickly, going back to the unsupervised minors with internet access. And some of you may have attended last month's presentation on the social media safety piece, but we are seeing that incline that we knew that we were probably going to see. We talked about that last month, how with COVID, that a lot of the reporting for human trafficking was down, but we knew that once we would start phasing from phase 1, 2 to 3 out of quarantine and social distancing, that we would see that increase. And we are seeing that. A majority of these reports that are coming in, a vast majority of the reports are coming in, is where the children were recruited from social media apps, gaming systems, while they were social distancing, the amount of time that they were spending on these apps and games. And what we feared, it seems to be coming to fruition as far as these reports are coming in, that these kids are being recruited and groomed from those social media apps. So that's so important for the parents out there to really know what your kids are doing, who they're communicating with, and on these social media and gaming apps. The gang affiliation, we are seeing a rise also with gang affiliated sex trafficking. As we go on with this presentation, you'll understand how much money this industry brings in, and gangs are realizing they can make actually more money selling people, primarily females, in the gangs, opposed to even drug sale. So most of you have heard, you can sell drug one time and you have to go back get more drugs. Whereas with a person, you sell them over and over again, and that's so true. And that's what we're seeing. These gangs is getting the minors and adults working with the gangs and selling them for sex. And we are seeing definitely an increase. These cases are very difficult to work. The participation to get gang members to talk, whether they're male or female, because of the level of violence and criminal activity that's going on. They know if they roll on a gang member, most likely they're going to be hurt or killed. So therefore, the fear drives the industry, and it's very hard to get them to communicate on what's actually going on within that gang. So again, we are seeing gang members be arrested. They may not be arrested or prosecuted for human trafficking, but they are being prosecuted maybe for other crimes that we can get them on, to just get them off the street.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks to you both. One of the things you might have thought about as you were listening to LaShawn and Marina is that it's rare to see one of those characteristics or qualities or aspects of a person's life represented in any of us, right? So it's this concept of intersectionality, maybe one you've heard, but it's a really vital one for us to keep in mind as we go forward and do work with any vulnerable population, and particularly around human trafficking. It came out of sociology, and really it deals with an overlap of several different identities that many of us have. Part of the initial work of this was around how sexism, for example, looks very different if you're white or if you're an African American woman, and so on. So a lot of that describes these various layers and kind of the overlap of all of the vulnerabilities that you just heard described. And I wanted to put in here too that it's vital that you sort of get in touch with all of the things and how they're intersecting, how any of us as complex individuals have lots going on, have lots that characterize who we are, whether it's our level of education, our race, our ethnicity, our faith, our whatever, that these all comprise, they make up the complex humans that we are. I think one of the most vital parts of this for us, though, is to understand in the dictionary this definition of that it is complex, cumulative, and in the way that multiple forms of specifically discrimination like racism, sexism, classism combine, overlap, or intersect to impact essentially marginalized individuals or groups. And that's really a lot of what we're talking about here today. So just to keep that concept of intersectionality in mind, I think will help you understand and also make it a lot easier for you to support people who are trafficked or who are vulnerable. So Marina, may I turn this over to you?
Yes. So understanding human trafficking, I'm sure some of you work in this field and you already know this, but in the state of Florida, with human trafficking, with sex trafficking, if it's a minor, you do not have to prove that force, fraud, or coercion piece. Of course, if they're over 18, unless they're in a vulnerable adult, you would have to prove that element. But again, it's not that difficult to prove. We work these cases for a long time now, and we know there's a lot of coercion, whether it's through drugs or fear and put in place for their safety or their family's safety. There's a lot of force. It does become very violent. We're going to go into that in a little bit throughout this presentation. But it is a form of modern day slavery, and people need to understand it's the psychological coercion and bonds, the trauma bonding that really holds our victims within this element. And the reason, a lot of times when you see pictures or images, you're seeing you're seeing chains, or you're seeing handcuffs, or you're seeing dog cages, or container trucks and things like that. And not to say that some victims do not go through that, because there is a percentage, a very small percentage, that we see the physical bond. But what we see more so than anything is that psychological bond, and it's those invisible chains that brings them there. The fear, the shame, the stigma that goes behind everything that's going on within the trafficking experience. So, and we're going to talk more about labor trafficking and sex trafficking and what our federal and state definitions are here in the next couple of slides. So here we go. So what is human trafficking? So it's the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a child for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And under federal and state law, sex trafficking such as prostitution, pornography, exotic dancing, again, does not require there to be force, fraud, or coercion if the victim is under 18. So basically, if the child cannot consent, in the state of Florida, we do not have child prostitution laws. They have been since October 1 of 2016. That definition was stricken and it was replaced with commercial sexually exploited child, or CSEC. So we no longer arrest children for prostitution, even if there's no third party, even if no one's making them, no one's using force, fraud, or coercion. If that child is maybe exchanging sexual activities for a ride out of town, for substances, for food, for shelter, for clothing, that's categorized as survival sex trafficking, because that child cannot consent. That child is still a victim of trafficking, and we need to provide services and figure out what's going in that child's life where they felt that was what they needed to do to be able to survive or to continue with whatever's going on in their life. So again, with adult victims, unless there's a vulnerability, a disability, physical or mental disability, then of course they could be exploited and not necessarily have to use that force, fraud, or coercion. But, and we do see some of those cases with our aging adults and with our mental and physical handicapped population. So moving on to labor trafficking, is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. So we see all these things in Florida. We do see a lot of in the hospitality industry. We see in the architectural work as well as our field work. We see a lot, especially when we're dealing with minors with the door-to-door sales. That's where we see the most throughout Florida, and when we're dealing with minors. And they will recruit right out of the neighborhoods. Sometimes they talk to the parents, sometimes they don't. And they'll recruit, usually they go in more impoverished areas of town, and they will recruit minors, usually especially young minors, to sell trinkets, sell magazines, we've seen, palm trees, we've seen food, like meat out of back of trucks and things like that. And they will bring them into middle class or upper middle class neighborhoods, drop them off, no water, no food. They have no idea where they are. They have no idea where maybe sex offenders live, which is another concern. And again, they're fairly young because, if a child knocks on your door and they say they're selling candy for their school, and usually they're going to say it's for an anti-drug campaign, or they may say it's for a sporting team or for new uniforms or what have you. If they're younger, it pulls at your heartstrings. So you see this younger person, you're like, sure, I'll give you a donation, or yes, I'll buy that. Where if it's an older teen or an adult, you're less likely to probably do that. So that's one reason why they do like to recruit the younger ones. You may even see them outside of grocery stores. You may see them on the street corners. The biggest thing to look for is if they're supervised. So think about the Girl Scouts. Whenever the Girl Scouts are selling those great cookies that they do every year, they're outside the supermarkets or what have you, and there's always a parent or a scout guide or what have you, a leader. There's always an adult. So when you see these minors out there and they do not have an adult, they're not being supervised, that's when you do need to contact your local law enforcement or contact the tip lines that will be at the end of this presentation to let us know what is going on so we can see if this is a labor trafficking ring. Again, it's all other areas as well. There's 3 elements of trafficking. So recruitment, harboring, moving, or obtaining a person for the means of force, fraud, or coercion, and the purpose is for the involuntary servitude, debt, bondage, slavery, and sex trade. A lot of times what will end up happening is there's a lot of crossover between labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So you may see someone that's brought over here to work. Maybe they were going to be a nanny or do some field work or what have you, and they agreed they wanted to come to this country to better their life. And once they get here, that debt bondage increases. So they're brought over here, you know, it was $1,500. Then when they met with the person that was going to transport them, it was another $1,500. And then they bought them food, clothes, shelter, and it just continues to add up to they can never get their way out. And they're having to send money home to provide for their families. And that debt just continues to increase and increase and increase. And what will happen is they'll say, well, if you want to make more money, this is a way to do that. And then that crosses over a lot of times into sex trafficking from labor trafficking. So they're actually being labor trafficked and they're also being sex trafficked. Another means that also to look at that when they're forced to sell drugs. So a lot of, whether it's gangs or other people in the community, if they're forced to run the drugs, if they're forced to sell the drugs for their traffickers, that can also cross over from sex trafficking to labor trafficking as well. So that's something we also see. So trafficking in Florida, people ask, does it happen here? And absolutely it does. And it happens all over Florida. It's not just in particular pockets. Of course, in your urban cities, you're going to see more trafficking opposed to rural. But with that social media piece that I was talking about before, in that recruitment piece, we do see a lot of the kids that are targeted in rural areas and are brought in a lot of times to the more urban areas. And the reason for that is a lot of our rural communities, their guards are down because they're saying, this doesn't happen in my community. This is a big city problem. This is not our small community problem. We do not see prostitution in our areas. Well, what it is everything's online. It's not necessarily visible. So you got to think when you're talking to someone online, you're talking to someone all over the world. And they will recruit and be able to communicate with these kids because the parents believe that since it's not happening, their guards are down, whether it be in person, allowing them to go out shopping or what have you without someone there, or if they are on social media, they don't really pay attention to what actually they're doing because this is not on their radar. So we do see that in pretty much every county throughout Florida. We are third in the nation as far as the human trafficking reports that are being called in. And there's a lot to that. So, of course, we're a large state, a large populated state, so they play a factor. We are known as more of a party state. So a lot of our runaways from other areas of the country tend to like to come to Florida. It's warm. They can survive on the street here. We have beaches. Everyone wants to come to Orlando. Everyone wants to come to Miami because it's hyped up on TV shows that they see and things like that. So we do get a lot of the kids from other parts of the country. We have a lot of things activities that go on in Florida. You have a lot of music fests. You have a lot of outdoor activities and concerts and things like this. And anytime, anything that's a large crowd, it doesn't have to be music. It could be sport teams. It could be conventions, anything that's going to draw a large amount of people in one particular area, you're going to see those numbers rise on those human trafficking cases. And they're being brought over from all over the country, but also all over Florida to go to those particular venues. So these are all reasons. But another reason is our advocacy work is very, very strong in Florida. We will train pretty much anyone that will listen to us at this point. We provide free trainings for law enforcement, for medical, for educators, for the hospitality industry, pretty much anyone that would like to listen to in community events and community awareness. So of course, whenever you are doing more trainings, you're getting that awareness out there to learn how to identify and how to report. Of course, we see a rise in those reports as well. So that's another reason that we are seeing more reports maybe than some of the other states.
People always ask too, what are the other top two? And those are Texas and California. And one of the other things to add on this too is I think some of the recent laws passed in Florida, Marina, that include publicizing the National Human Trafficking Hotline number in bars, at rest stops, and emergency rooms, massage establishments. I think those kinds of things help as well.
Absolutely. As you can see, these are just our Department of Children and Families numbers. We began investigating human trafficking back in 2009, and you can see we only had 43 reports. And a lot of that, to be honest with you, I was an investigator and a specialized unit. And so we were piloted to try to see how we were going to work these cases. And at that point in time, we were paired with Homeland Security investigators, because that's who was taking the lead pretty much at that point in time. And honestly, we were looking like the movie Taken, right? We were looking how a lot of people look at human trafficking. We were looking for maybe minors that were brought over here from other countries and being exploited. We were looking for people coming in on cargo containers. Had this unrealistic view of what trafficking actually was. But as we began investigating these cases, we kept coming across over and over and over again on our domestic kids, our local kids that were meeting the criteria for our victims that we were searching for, or international victims, but they were coinciding with our domestic victims. So we had to kind of come back to the table and say, wait a minute, hold up, let's reevaluate this. Let's see what we actually have. And what we were seeing is a vast amount of children that was being arrested for child prostitution, although we knew that they were being exploited. So we really need to go back to the table and evaluate that and see how we were going to provide the appropriate services to get these children out of these circumstances. So as you see, year after year, more education, more trainings, more training the outside community, training law enforcement, training professions. And as you can see, as we continue to do that training and that awareness piece, each year, those numbers continue to grow. And you will see a spike in 2017, and that's also because of a lot of legislative changes. That's when the doctors and the nurses had mandatory trainings, which they still have to do today. I'm actually doing one Sunday for pharmaceutical association. So the pharmacists now have to be trained, paramedics, and so forth and so on. So when you see this, you see those reports grow. You'll see the difference. On your right-hand side, you're going to see it says unique IDs. What that means is we've already identified that particular minor as a victim of trafficking. And then you see the total number on the other side. So you can see there that we do see a lot of repetitiveness. Now, people ask, why is that? And a lot of that is because a lot of times victims do not self-identify. So they're not ready. They believe that it's my body. If they believe I love this person, we're doing this as a team. No one's forcing me. No one's making me do this. I want to do this. But they don't really understand the totality around the victimization piece and how they're being coerced, and how if someone really truly did love them, they would not hurt them or would not want them to expose them in such dangerous situations. So a lot of times it takes, planting that seed and trying to provide those services. In the state of Florida, we do not do any type of court-ordered services. The services have to be voluntary for our victims to receive those services. And the only exception to that is if they have severe mental health and they receive suitability assessments or CDHAs that state they need a higher level of care, meaning they need more restrictive mental health services. Again, as you can see in this next slide, that pretty much in every county in Florida that we are seeing human trafficking coming in. Now, this is through the Polaris Project. So to make a note, so that is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and you'll get that information at the end. It's a tip line that is available nationally. But we also have here in Florida the Department of Children and Families Child Abuse Hotline. So if a tip is called into the National Human Trafficking line, it's going to be transferred over to DCF's Child Abuse Hotline to get that information out there and it's signed. However, a lot of reports do not go through the National Tip Line. They go straight to the Child Abuse Hotline. So when you're seeing these numbers, this is only the numbers that came into the National Human Trafficking Tip Line, not necessarily the ones that just strictly came into the Child Abuse Hotline and did not go through Polaris. So you will see that those numbers will be a little skewed there. Understanding the male victimization, people oftentimes when they picture human trafficking or they envision it, they envision a female, whether it's a minor or an adult. But we oftentimes do not think about the male population. And there's male victimization, absolutely 100%. So we see it being exploited, and usually around, if they're 11 to 14 or younger, there is a third party. It's familial trafficking. So there's a family member that is selling that child for sexual services or labor services. It could be, you know, but also if they're 15 to 19 or older, typically they're independent. And that's what differs from males. Now, I will say we have seen some cases where they did definitely have third party after the age of 14. They had a trafficker. They had, and also I should say, if I say the word trafficker, I'm referring to a pimp. I do not use the word pimp. It's not in our legal language. And it's also a glorified word. So the word, if I say trafficker, I'm referring to a pimp. But we are seeing more cases where these males are getting involved with a trafficker, and it could be also the same thing. The traffickers could be male, and the traffickers could be female, and we are seeing that because they are less males being victimized. And with that being said, oftentimes they actually even get more money for the males opposed to the females because there's less of them, right? So we're talking about that demand piece. So we know that it's happening. We know that kids that run, they need food, they need clothes, they need shelter. Oftentimes they have substance abuse problems, and that will lead to their victimization. Now, and also I would like to say, just because they are selling their bodies to other men does not make them classify or relate as a gay male. Oftentimes when I've worked with males, that's the first thing that they tell me. They want to make it very clear to me, I'm not a gay male. And I want to make that very clear. That's who's normally the buyer. And don't get me wrong, females do buy sex also, but again, there's more males that buy, and therefore they're having to meet those needs of food, clothing, shelter, substance abuse, or whatever they need to ride out of town. And therefore they sell their bodies for that demand piece, which is oftentimes women. Again, those transgender youth, we talked about that a little bit, and our LGBTQ plus community is definitely at a higher vulnerability also of getting involved in trafficking. Looking at the research that goes along with male victimization, we know that the research is estimating as much as 50% of C-sex is the U.S. are in boys. We know there's a shortage of services for males. We do have a male safe home here in Florida, and we do provide services for male victims. Oftentimes, again, that self-identification piece, that shame and stigma that goes along with victimization is very difficult and deep-rooted with male victimization. We talked about the youth that don't identify or that do identify as gay or transgender are also going to be among the majority, and as well as at much higher risk of being trafficked as well.
So one of the things that we see is, and just kind of coming off of that last slide, Marina, is that very often males are seen as invisible. And I think that's another characteristic of underserved populations in our culture. This is just a slide that shows you how we see or come across cases of human trafficking in many different frameworks and many different systems in many different ways. So regardless of where you sit, what your job is, or what you do as a volunteer in your community, you're going to see human trafficking come forward. I want to mention too, at the end of this presentation, we'll have information, for example, regarding healthcare assistance and other ways you can screen in order to determine whether somebody is trafficked or is vulnerable to being trafficked. But it's just important to realize sometimes whatever world we happen to be in, I'm a lawyer, I tend to think of the justice system first, but we should really realize that, for example, if I were helping a survivor of human trafficking with a protection order, I'm really going to have to pay attention to what's going on. Does she have a job? Does she need a job? Is she able to survive? My piece around whatever that survivor needs may not be the most important one, because this other system is really pulling on that person's needs at the time. So it's just important to keep this kind of this idea playing in the background for you. One of the things we also want to stress for you is that, again, I mentioned at the top that human trafficking doesn't happen in a vacuum. It hasn't happened in an historical vacuum or in our, present history, if you will, that there are both push and pull factors. We see people, and this could be people coming from other countries or people coming from a rural area to an urban area. that you see things like poverty. LaShawn mentioned the realities of poverty in our culture, economic collapse, any kind of instability, which, hello, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, global pandemic crisis. So I can guarantee you that we are seeing increases in both vulnerability and people who are trying to either escape or being preyed on in terms of human trafficking. We also know that gender violence is a reason why people leave. Disasters, we're still seeing the effects of Hurricane Michael, which will be 2 years in October up here. And in Florida, of course, and all around the country, we see all kinds of economic issues that really make people move from one place to another, or they're pulled to reunite with family or have other kinds of needs. We see people from other countries that come to the U.S. because of economic, insecurity, impoverishment, and moving to become, have a better life, send money home for medicine for their children. We also see that various oppressions are alive and well and at work. Gender oppression at the root of sex trafficking, and you might think of that only as applied to women, but know that that also applies in terms of men, in terms of our transgender communities, and also a demand for cheap labor really is at the root of labor trafficking. Again, thinking about how, what we mentioned before, there's a commercial aspect to pretty much every aspect of trafficking. So if you have somebody who is exploiting somebody for economic gain or exploiting somebody because they don't want to pay for something, that is at the root of labor trafficking. And we're seeing more and more work around this issue of seeing how the demand for sex trafficking is rooted in pornography addictions. So know that, again, the issues here go deep, and also have that intersectionality with current situations that people are undergoing. This is a slide just as a reminder. Any of you who have sat through a human trafficking training have seen that human trafficking and smuggling, although often confused, are very different. At the root of this is the idea that trafficking is a crime against a person, with smuggling being a crime against the border. Really, this amounts to exploitation of an individual versus of the border. The commodity regarding trafficking is the person. The commodity regarding smuggling is transportation. Know that with human trafficking, you never have to have a border crossing, even of a county line, in order for there to be human trafficking, as opposed to you absolutely need it with smuggling, right? And also know that sometimes we see people being promised, say, if I wanted to cross a border, I might go to somebody and say, I'll pay you $5,000, get me across the US border. And that would be a smuggling. In my mind, smuggling until I arrived in the US, where they would say, sorry, all bets are off. You have to pay off an additional $5,000 by working in my factory or in my bar or anything else. So that's where it would turn into a trafficking situation from a smuggling situation. We also want you to know there's another intersectionality to be aware of. And in our world here with the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center, a fair number of our clients are in this framework right here. The intersectionality between domestic and dating violence and human trafficking is very real. We see domestic violence and dating violence abusers forcing their spouses or their partners, intimate partners, to commit sex acts for money or for, again, exchange for anything of commercial value. We know that I have seen cases in doing research of abusers who have forced their spouses and children to panhandle on the streets. In other words, force them into labor trafficking situation. We know that these are very common situations. So I put that out there for you all to stay aware that you could have both, especially any of you in law enforcement. Something, prosecution of human trafficking crimes and DV crimes could be simultaneous because those perpetrators are committing both. We also know that there's a very strong intersectionality between sexual assault and overlap, I should say, and labor trafficking. these are instances where you might see that. So you'll see somebody who might be abused at work and threatened with harm. You might see it as part of sexual harassment. I had a colleague in a Midwest state who, when she was investigating, a lawyer was investigating a human trafficking situation. One of the women working in this egg farm said, and then of course we have to have sex with the crew boss. And the colleague said, I almost fell off my chair. What are you talking about? She said, oh yeah, in order to keep our jobs, we had to have sex with the crew boss. So know that that's a reality. A recent webinar that I was on with Dr. Elizabeth Hopper, she talked about how recent studies have shown at least 25% of labor trafficking cases include sexual assault of the victim. Know that that's also a way to pay off a debt. I am bringing up to as many people as I can that, as we have with COVID, landlords saying, I can't evict you, I can't enforce your lease. So if you want to keep your apartment, you have to have sex with me. So know that that also is a form of sex trafficking, again, exchange of a sexual act for something of value, and is happening without COVID-19, but is happening even more. And of course, we often see that that children and others are forced, or not even forced. They are induced to perform sex acts just to survive and to have something to eat and drink. And I will turn this over to Graciela.
So, can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So who are the traffickers? You see this list, and I can add more score services, landscaping. We have right there, labor subcontractors. We have boyfriends too. So please tell me, what do you think it is in common here? Who are the traffickers? The actual common thing is that nothing is in common. There is not a profile of a trafficker. It could be any of this, and we can keep adding in the list. There's not a specific type. There is not specific race or background. It really could be any one of this. We have worked with victims that have been trafficked by families. And so then the fact that you see somebody and they say, well, I am staying with my uncle or something, that doesn't mean anything, because the family could be as Robin was mentioning, it could be the trafficker. Business people and professional, you see all this list that and probably along the conversation that we have here with you guys, you will see at the end that you might remember something, that how probably that was a traffic situation, and that has happened to all of us. So okay, so then this is a perfect example of what I was saying. It really could be anyone. Do you want to take the lead, Marina, or do you want me to keep going?
Sure, I can. Right. So as you're saying, that it really, the faces is all over the gamut, right? Anyone can be a trafficker. It could be a gang member. It could be a pastor. It could be a mother. It could be a father. It could be a grandparent. It could be just someone within the community or the neighborhood. It could be someone within the school system. It could be a student or a friend. It goes all across the gamut. But what we see when they're starting and beginning into, or they're lured into human trafficking, and it truly is a 3-stage process of recruitment: the lure, trust, and payback. It aligns very closely to domestic violence, of how victims normally will talk about how their victimization occurred. So in the beginning, it was a lot of charming, it was a lot of affection, it was a lot of compliments, a lot of things that just fill in that void of what they need in their life. So if that trafficker, and the traffickers are master manipulators, folks. I mean, they really, if they would use their skill to be in good ways, they would make the best FBI profilers because they really can pick up on that vulnerability almost immediately. So if that person needs a father figure or a mother figure, if they need a friend, they need a protector, whatever that person needs in their life, they're going to try to fill that void within their life. And it's not genuine. It's all about the game. It's all about the money. So they're going to do whatever they have to do to make them believe this is who they are. So they get them to trust them. They get them to love them. They manipulate them. And that's, again, it does align some with domestic violence, like I said, with the compliments and the love and the genuinity in the beginning. And then it moves on to, well, something occurred. Maybe you didn't have dinner ready or the house wasn't clean or whatever. And then there's a domestic violence. And then it's all the affection back of, oh, I love you so much. I'll never do this again. And they believe them because it never happened before. And then it happens again. So as a lot of you, if you guys had domestic violence training, it takes about average of 7 times for a person to leave a violent relationship. And we see that also aligning with human trafficking. It oftentimes takes 7+ times for them to leave. And a lot of times they will return. And a lot of people don't understand that. And that goes along with that trauma bonding piece. Because they feel that fear, they feel that shame. They've been told so many times that the only thing they're ever going to be good at is sex. That why are they trying to better their life? Why are they trying to go to school? Why are they trying to work? The only thing that they're good at is sex. So why do you keep doing these things? And when we do get them into services and oftentimes in a stable situation and something happens, they don't do well on a test. If they're in school, maybe they had a good relationship with someone and they broke up. Or all these things could happen and it triggers and they go back. Why am I trying? Why am I doing this? I just need to go back to what I know, and that is to what I'm good at, and that is sex. So a lot of times we do see that from that victim's perspective of what exactly happens.
It is also good to consider that some of the victims have language barriers. They are coming here to the United States. Sometimes we see populations that they are in Latin America, but they don't even speak Spanish. So even finding a translator that goes from the dialect to Spanish or to English, which is almost virtually impossible, it is difficult. So this person already has the language barrier. And sometimes the victims have fears and shame about what they are doing. For example, if it is labor trafficking and they were smuggled into this country, that the knowledge, the fact that they know they were smuggled, it is something that they don't want to disclose. Why would they want to disclose that? They know it wasn't right. So then there's this shame about that, and the way that they were smuggled also carries a lot of things. Including probably they were raped or they were abused physically. So they don't want to talk about that. Of course, most of the time there is distrust for authority. One of the reasons is people that are coming from other countries, like from Latin America, we will not automatically, most of the countries, we will not automatically trust the authority because we're coming from countries where the authorities are, and there is a lot of corruption and a lot of injustice. So we will kind of transfer that to here, thinking that the authorities won't help us. In addition to the traffickers also tell people, do not trust in the authorities. One, because I know them, which might not be true. Very likely might not be true. And because you ended up coming here, and then there's coming this this threat of I'm going to hurt you or I'm going to hurt your family. So the victim is not actually being that open to disclose what is the situation. And as Marina has said, it's possible that the victim thinks that she has or he has a boyfriend-girlfriend situation. if they come and explain the situation to us, as I have experience as an advocate, and they explain what is the situation with, in a couple of cases, it was boyfriends, then I realize, anyone will realize that this is a start exploitation and trafficking, and but they don't see it. They see that's my boyfriend, that's what I need to do in order to keep the relationship, and he really loves me. So then if you as an advocate get into that part, and trying to explain, or you always need to leave the door open, but try to help the person to leave the situation. I don't like to use that, rescue or save, I don't like it, but help to leave the situation. That person won't be ready because that person is not identified themselves as a victim. And also we talk about the Stockholm syndrome. Marina also mentioned this trauma bonding, which is very unhealthy, but that's what happens a lot of the times. And ultimately, I want to make sure that you know about using trauma-informed care. It is very good approach. That's what we use here. We utilize this approach. If we might not have time to explain what it is, I encourage you to take other webinars, or probably we can think about doing another one. Okay, so this is very interesting because I have been talking about other populations or other groups of people coming to United States. So let me put it in two parts. One is, I want to give you a couple examples. For example, we have the 1975 Southeast Asian people from the mainland came to United States, a very large group of people with, already a lot of issues. We have communities like Cuban people coming from in big, large waves, 1970 and 216, I think it is. So this large of people are coming here and are trying to adapt or assimilate or somehow live in this country with already a lot of issues and trauma and whatever it is. There's always some kind of conflict, refugees. You guys know some refugees. But then when they come here, and here in the United States, we already have this, colonization. So we have a history also with slavery, we have misogyny, we have racism, homophobia. We already have a lot of historical oppression here. So the groups of people that are coming, for example, from Vietnam, they are coming as a group of people that they lost the war, right? So they come in here and they are labeled, and they might be ashamed, or they might have some kind of a stigma. And also the ones that we live here, we are also dealing with all that. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand, or you take in consideration, that there is also other factors that are affecting, identify and support victims and survivors of human trafficking.
I'd like to go through the next slide pretty quickly. And Marina, if you don't mind, would you like to do that for this one? And I'll do it for the other one so we can get to our scenarios.
Sure. So some sex trafficking indicators that you may see and you should be on the lookout for is definitely tattoos and tags. Tattooing is very relevant. And as far as how traffickers look at it as marking their property, so to speak. So it's still an issue. Unusual high amounts of numbers of sexual partners, especially when they're coming in for medical exams, or they're doing medical history and things like that. Seasonal or situational inappropriate clothing, that definitely is one, but I would say, if anyone's been to the local mall or what have you, of course, we haven't been anywhere for a while, but prior to March, if you had been, you probably saw that a lot of kids these days wear things we may consider to be inappropriate. So we have to be kind of careful with that. But it is something that, if you're at a hotel and you see people that appear young or answering the doors in lingerie and that kind of thing, definitely something to look out for. As far as the language or rough language or terms, is that they do have their own language. There's certain things that's being said within the trafficking community that is known as a language for trafficking. Under 18 and involved in obviously commercial sex industry, if they're located in a location that's known for prostitution or at a hotel that's known for prostitution, and that type of thing is definitely a higher level, that most likely risk factor that something's going on. They have multiple STDs, STIs, or abortions. We do see that. And when I train healthcare, I let them know to be really looking for that and not just to avoid that. Also, if they are ordering large amounts of condoms, so they're going to CVS, Walgreens, or a local pharmacy, and they're ordering like 1,000 count of condoms every week or every 2 weeks, again, huge red flag that something's probably going on. Usually most folks are not using that amount unless they're working for some type of agency that's handing them out for free or something like that.
Exactly. And also here's a list of some labor trafficking, labor trafficking indicators. Just know that these are things that might come up as you speak with a survivor. They might say, oh, I have to live here, or there's no way I can come back, or I don't have my ID. I never get breaks. I don't get to wear the mask that they say I'm supposed to wear, that other people wear. So all of these ideas of essentially being treated badly in a hazardous and dangerous workplace, and things that are definitely illegal in terms of, denying somebody food, water, bathroom breaks, etc., are all things that could characterize labor trafficking. And as Marina mentioned earlier, there's these minors on traveling sales crews. So what we'd like to do now is kind of to apply all this and really to focus on issues that each of the three scenarios we have here might affect the particular case scenario. What I'm going to do is read the scenario out loud, and then each one of our presenters will engage in a back and forth about how we could, one, recognize the challenges, facing everybody in each scenario. What are some intersectionalities, and what support could be provided? And what I'd like to do when we're doing this is start out and ask all these three questions for each of the scenarios. So when we do Carla and talk about Carla, I'd like you all in the chat to think about these things: what challenges she's facing, and that would include some of these intersectionality issues, and where you would find support. I'd also encourage you to think of these scenarios from your own perspectives. You might say, well, am I a social worker or am I law enforcement when I see Carla? You are you. And so what we want you to do is say, you might find a Carla at the bus stop. You might find a Carla, in your church. So the idea is, what would you do to help her? And know that the services, what are the services in your community that you would reach out to? Because after all, we know it certainly takes a village to assist survivors of trafficking. So we'll start with Carla. Case study number 1. Carla, 40, came to the U.S. from Guatemala to work as a nanny and a housekeeper for a wealthy couple and their 3 children, 2-year-old twin girls and a teenage boy. From her country. So she grew attached to the children. After 1 year, she secretly sent a letter to her home country to her son, Paulo, back in Guatemala, saying she could not send more money home because the couple lied and are now making her pay for food and a room and the money she owed them for transportation to the U.S. This makes her debt grow. She also told her son that she had no days off except sometimes Sundays to go to church. She said if she complained or left them, Paulo could be in danger. She did not tell him she was very ashamed because the husband raped her and often grabs her sexually on her breasts and between her legs. She wants to leave, but loves the two little ones and takes good care of them. She works very hard and believes if she keeps working hard, they will pay her more so she can pay off her debt faster and send more money home. She's depressed. So with this one, Graciela, I'd ask you to give us some of your thoughts. And again, to people listening to Carla's story, what they're thinking about the challenges she's facing, and really, where could she get help in the community? Graciela, what are your thoughts?
Sorry. Okay, so first of all, her safety worries me a lot because the husband, not the husband, a patron, the person that is working, raped her already. So I am concerned about if she's pregnant, if she has any STDs, and especially that he's going to possibly do it again. Not only that, I am concerned because the son probably will start doing the same thing. So, and I can see even going more that if this person that just raped her is bringing other people to the equation and then will, traffic her with other people. I think it's a challenge also the fact that she's attached to the kids, very, very attached. We know about a case like that where really the heart of the person went to the kids and really didn't want to leave the situation. One of the reasons was because she was really attached to the little ones, and then that's a challenge.
And by the way, on that point too, another challenge Debbie just brought up is that there's emotional abuse going on too.
Absolutely, and that's probably that's what I was going to mention. That don't forget about the cultural shock. I mean, she is coming from another country. She was told that she was going to be doing this and receiving that, and she doesn't speak English. She doesn't understand the how the law works or how to get friends or how does that work. As a social worker, I would like to language barrier. I'm seeing that absolutely, completely right on target. We talk about that. So I would like to start with safety. I would like to start explaining to her that there is a concept that probably she doesn't have or doesn't understand that well, which is shelter. We here in the United States talk about things as a everyone knows about that. Shelter is a concept that started developing not too long ago in Mexico. So she wouldn't know what, who handles the shelter, how does that look like? So start talking to her about the concept of she can be safe and, be in a place where also she can get some help from probably members from the church. You start introducing the counseling, and also very important too, and this is a lot and probably I could keep going, but the number 3 is legal services. So her situation needs to also be addressed by an attorney that also start explaining to her rights. And this is just to mention some. I don't want to take time from my colleagues away. So please, that's reach out to Immigration Legal Services.
And here's some more, some great, Derek talked about getting perhaps HIV services to her with test kits that she could take home. Someone else mentioned her church might be a place of refuge. Often traffickers let victims go to church. Health department, if you have police and law enforcement advocates who understand this issue. Several people brought up the importance of mental health access, connecting her with a culturally appropriate counseling and maybe a doctor, other kinds of healthcare services. So you all are great. You've got a lot of ideas, and you're tapping into a lot of different services in your own communities. I could tell that advocacy would be very, very important for her. So that's great.
I want to answer a quick question that somebody wrote here. If she's all the time at home, how would you talk to her? I have a situation recently like that, where the women in this case were all the time working, never left. They just went to the grocery store. So if you're around and you are seeing the situation start, this takes time. So start talking with, or saying good morning or something, and start with that at the grocery store, at the washing clothes, church. They do leave the house eventually, going and take the girls the park, or something like that. That's the answer.
Yeah, great. Well, let's move on to case study number 2 with Mary. Mary is an African-American woman. She grew up in rural North Florida and now lives at the local homeless shelter. She ran away from home at 17 because she had been sexually abused by her stepfather and other men since she was 10. She's developmental disabilities and never graduated from high school. Over the years, she lived on the streets, often having sex with men to support her drug habit or for food or a place to crash. Last year, a man at her NA meeting approached her and offered to give her a ride. She liked the way he treated her, but after a month, he asked to take photos of her, usually performing sex acts. He threatened to share the photos if she reported that he raped her, and told her that he'd kill her and her sister if she didn't do what he said, which was to have sex with many men. She escaped after 8 months and is now at the homeless shelter. She can't sleep, is anxious, depressed, extremely compliant with the case managers, and always promising she'll do things like work on her GED, but does not follow through. By the way, I didn't mention before, but these are cases that are from the work that STAC does in our community, as well as what we've learned from other survivors' experiences from our colleagues. So, LaShawn, I'd like to welcome you back into the conversation here and ask you to talk about the challenges that Mary is facing and kind of what you see could be helpful to her in our community, and ask the same thing of the people in the chat.
Absolutely. So I'll make it kind of quick for the sake of time. But with Mary, she is African American. And one of the things that I want to point out is in the African American community, sometimes it's not always popular to get help, especially when it comes down to trafficking. There's a lot of misnomers that it doesn't happen to Black people. We don't want all those people in our business. So that's one of the things that I'm sure she's dealing with. She's also had a very transient life. Running away from home at 17, there's a lot of instability, and she's homeless right now. The sexual abuse is huge, and so that's one of those traumas that it takes a lot of time to heal from. So pretty sure she's dealing with that, and that's also a safety concern also for her. A lot of people who have been sexually abused one time, it happens to them over and over and over again. There's probably some naiveness there because she has been out since she's been 17. And so that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind for her. The fact that she is now living in a shelter is really, really good, but she's in need of some mental health services. And a lot of times what happens in the shelter, they kind of start to open the client up to services, but it's not long-term and substantial. So she would definitely need a referral for some long-term services. And then if you notice, one of the things that the scenario says is she promises to do things but does not follow through. This is one of those things that is very prevalent in individuals who have a lot of trauma. There are well intentions to do the right thing, but it's like a squirrel. There's a lot of things going around in their head. There's a lot of things happening in their world. So right at the moment of committing, sometimes they regress. on the wheel of change, regression is very, very huge. And it also has a lot to do with trust. You know, the moment you start trusting someone, they can let you down. So right at that moment of change, a lot of times they make up their mind not to trust the individual. And so they go back into old behaviors. And then in the chat, one of the people say, don't forget her developmental disabilities. That right there is huge because people often take advantage of those who are both physically and mentally disabled. And so in this situation, there are a lot of agencies here locally in our community. So she would definitely be referred to one of those agencies that specialize in working with those with disabilities.
You've hit on so many great things, and others in the chat have also talked about that, and also are getting to other resources in the community, that building of trust, how someone at an NA meeting of all places got to her and seduced her into this situation is really important as you move forward with her. So again, another example of many different community services that are available. But everybody, you need to understand too, I think that community services are available to help trafficking victims well, to the extent they understand trafficking. So one of the things in your community that you can work hard at is doing cross training. Go to the trainings of others. If you're a trafficking expert, offer your expertise, and vice versa. Understand what goes on at other places. Go to the homeless shelter, see how their needs are operating, et cetera. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to kind of go through Jason quickly. And Marina, I'm going to ask you for some ideas, but this is really just, we've got 4 minutes, but what I'd like to do is just go through and mention this scenario. Jason is Caucasian, has a learning disability. He was bullied at kids at his school for most of his adolescence, and his parents kicked him out of the house at 16 when he told them he was gay. Stanley, a former youth leader at his old middle school, offered to take him in, and he was grateful. So when Stanley asked him, Jason didn't see any problem with camming. This is taking sexually explicit photographs for him. They were able to make some money and he could support himself. Jason later went to a duplex to live where there were 4 other male youth, and where Stanley ran a full-fledged operation where they were all sexually exploited to engage in explicit text-based chats and phone sex. Jason didn't like the work, but he liked his new family and didn't have any other place to live. Stanley also gives them drugs and alcohol, and Jason is glad as they take the edge off. By the way, a couple of you have asked, is this going to be available? Know that we'll have this up in a few days on STAC's website, surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. And this particular PowerPoint and other supporting materials are up there now. So Marina, what are you thinking is going on with Jason, and how could he be supported?
Okay. So one thing that he's dealing with is the childhood trauma and the rejection that he's received by his family, the lack of positive support within his life. There's that trauma bond there, and the grooming aspect of the trafficking situation, with him knowing the former youth leader and having him take him in. He was very grateful for that. He was grateful for this new family unit and that they were very accepting of him. So that bond was formed there. The substance abuse that was occurring there, that's an obvious concern, possible mental health that coincides with some things that was going on with that explosive situation. So he needs to really be connected with service providers that specialize with the LGBTQI plus community, case management services, mentorship services, to surround him with good role models, provide him support for education, for possible job placement, job training are all very important. The safety planning around what's going on to make sure that he's safe, as well as possibly some of the other folks that was also involved within this trafficking ring, so to speak. And it's very important that they work on very small goals. Trafficking victims oftentimes cannot see the big picture. So when you're looking at where do you want to be 5 years, 10 years down the road, oftentimes that's way too overwhelming. You need to take it at almost a day-by-day, week-by-week basis and set those small goals. And that way you don't overwhelm them. Because what will happen is if you overwhelm them with something and they can't complete the task, once they fail, they just feel like they can't continue in that they can't be successful. So we want to make baby steps on those goals, and as they achieve, continue to go on and boost them that they can do this. And this is something that they do have that support that wraps around them and can help them. And also good positive living arrangement for him, someplace to go that's safe and that can provide those services to him.
I want to thank everybody here and mention again, I'm going to go through these slides. So you have, these are things you can, again, pull this whole slide presentation off of our website. You can use the case scenarios, please do. And contact STAC if you need any other support. We're happy to help you with this. We've mentioned many of these survivor needs in the case scenarios. Again, knowing that you're not forcing disclosure and that you're linked to all of these services is important. This is a slide we always say, if there's an emergency, call 911. There's the DCF hotline, and there's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I hope you all know this, 888-3737, 888. Again, this information is available to you on our website in this slide presentation. Some next steps, we always encourage us, it's all about collaboration, everyone. It's all about sharing information and working together. And again, this is available. This whole presentation will be available for you to show if you want to others in your staff, etc. So make sure you think about human trafficking and all the work you do, all the work there. I mean, I work, and I told you, in the legal sector, but I work a lot in communities, and I'm still haven't found one agency, one organization, one business, one part of our community where you do not need to know anything about human trafficking. You absolutely do. So no, we can help. And also you have a local circuit human trafficking task force where you can reach out to in Florida throughout our state. This slide again is going to be on your, you can pull it down from our website. And here's all of our contact information. Again, so grateful to all of you presenters, Marina, LaShawn, Graciela, thank you so much for your expertise. We need another half an hour, don't we? And thank you all of you for attending.